During this next part of our discussion on managing hardware, we're going to look at just some general installation items with hardware and discuss some of the issues that we might have with hardware installation on Unix and Linux. Now, hardware can be problematic on some Unix and Linux systems. It really depends on drivers, if the hardware is supported through Linux and Unix, and if there are drivers there to support it. We all know that most hardware out there today is easily supported on Windows because that's what the target market is. A lot of hardware manufacturers produce hardware and target it to Windows users, so the drivers are produced. Most things, though, on modern Linux and Unix can be installed. It just might be a little tricky and might have to be tweaked with a little bit. Sound cards, videos, and printers are three of the things that can be tricky to install on Unix and Linux. Now, you'll find that a lot of things are picked up automatically during installation. On FreeBSD, for example, they can be a little problematic. On more commercially available Linux distributions that are more popular, such as Fedora, OpenSUSE, and so forth, you might find drivers more widely available for a piece of hardware. USB devices in general are usually easily detected and installed on most modern operating systems, including, of course, Linux, Windows, and even BSD. Now, one of the things I want to show you during the next demonstration coming up are the different ways to install hardware. BSD has its own ways, OpenSUSE has its own ways. In some cases, Red Hat and other Linux distributions have their own ways as well. So let's just look at a couple of examples of ways that hardware can be installed on Linux and Unix. One of the obvious ways that hardware can be installed on FreeBSD is through the sysinstall utility. Now, you'd think that there would be a lot of different options under sysinstall to install hardware, but there aren't really too many things. We can go ahead and look at configure here and get an idea of a few things that can be configured after installation. You'll find that most things that FreeBSD is going to install, it's going to find when it sets up the OS and install them automatically. Some things that you can play with are the keyboard. You can also install the mouse. You can also install a network card. If we arrow down through here, we can see that we can configure a mouse and load new drivers and so forth. We can also arrow down to networking and go ahead and install new network cards. Now, these items aren't all that you can install on FreeBSD, of course, but other things require either their own installation utility or tweaking files such as rc.conf and so forth. So installing hardware in FreeBSD is not always intuitive. It's not always the best and easiest method in the world of doing things. But of course, we didn't pick FreeBSD because it was easy, right? We picked it because it was true Unix. Let's go ahead and take a look at an easier way to install hardware through Linux, through OpenSUSE, and we'll look at OpenSUSE's method of installing hardware called YAST. We're looking at Novell's commercial version of OpenSUSE called SUSE Linux Enterprise Server 11. Although it's very much like the free open source distribution OpenSUSE, it's been commercialized a little bit, but it's still essentially the same thing. And one of the similarities is that it uses YAST, which is a system administration tool for OpenSUSE and SLES. And YAST is the way in OpenSUSE to install hardware. Let's go ahead and look at YAST. Now, this may differ from other Linux distributions and other Unix flavors you've seen before, but they each have normally their own hardware, software management utilities. So if we look at YAST, we can see that there is a graphically driven menu here, which actually is pretty intuitive. And looking at YAST and YAST2, its successor, we can look at hardware, and we can actually look at hardware information here. We can also install hardware. Let's look at hardware information. It's going to probe hardware dynamically and tell us what it's finding. Sometimes this can take a minute or two, but it should find all the hardware that's installed on the system, and it's almost complete. And so basically it's shown all of this hardware that's out there, and we can save that to a file and look at it later if we like. Now let's close this, and let's look at how OpenSUSE, or YAST in this case, actually detects sound cards and printers and so forth. Let's look at a sound card. So it's going to look and see if it can detect sound cards, and it's telling us it can't, but it can probe for each of these sound cards. So it actually produces a set of generic sound card drivers that it can probe for and see if they're installed on the system. Now, of course, if none of these sound cards are installed, you may have to use software that came with the sound card and poke around and try to install drivers. This is just two different ways of looking at installing hardware, through BSD's sysinstall menu and through YAST's installation utility. Now, again, other Linuxes and Unixes may use different utilities, and in some cases you're going to have to get down to the command line and either follow instructions from the manufacturer of the hardware or kind of tweak around with it until you get it to work. These are just two of the ways of installing hardware in general on Unix and Linux.